much, Laure. So I will just propose to the member of panel to come. Mr. Prime Minister Bernard Cazeneuve, first of all. And then after that, I will have former Minister of European Affairs of Poland. Okay, please, Mr. Konstantin Szymianski. And then we will have as well Vincent Montagne, who is the chair of media participation and also the president of the National Syndicate of Publishers in France. And I think there is Dominique Moisy or not? No, he's not coming. I think it was. Okay, thank you very much. So Dominique will join us, but he will be, you know, in remotely speaking. Thank you very much, everyone. I will mix the French and the English because part of the audience, you know, only speak English and part of the audience speaks French. But I will make my general introductions about the panel probably in English. Well, this panel is all about, you know, the very nature of Europe and the questions of the future of Europe. And I will recall what the former Czech foreign minister said once, which is basically the fate of Europe will be decided in Ukraine. It was in 2015. Now in Europe, we are facing an all-out war waged by Russia against not only Ukraine, but against the very principle of law. This war is not a kind of, let's say, territorial war, classic war, if even the wars, you know, classic war ever existed, but it's basically a war of exterminations. And it was, and it is still, a war against the principles of law, which is, in my view, very interesting. And there was a panel yesterday, fascinating panel, all of them were, but a fascinating panel shared by my friend Konstantin Sigov. And in this panel, everyone insisted on the importance of international law, and that if we are ready, basically, to destroy the very principle of international law, if we accept that the criminals rule the law, if we accept just to, as someone rightly said, to shake hands with a criminal and to make a so-called peace with a criminal, I'm naming Vladimir Putin, who is indicted, I just have to recall, by the International Criminal Court for war crimes, and actually he killed more than hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians, and before that, Syrians, Georgians, Chechens, etc. Then, basically, what is all about Europe? And now Europe is facing something which is completely unusual, I mean, or something that, of course, people here in the Department of La Manche perfectly know, but that we are not accustomed for, which is an all-out war. A war not only in Europe, because Kiev is only 3 hours flight from Paris, but a war on Europe. We are at war. Europe is at war. I mean, we must not, I mean, hide this very truth, that we are at war with Russia, and we are at war with also a regime that is trying to erase Europe and its very principles, the principle we stand for, from the face of the earth. I think we have to face this reality. And we have, because of this, we will have also to question the very nature of Europe. And I think that the real questions, which is the question of the threats. Threats from abroad, but also, and that the second part, threats from within. And I think the threats from within are also very important. I will come back maybe to the questions of international law, because international law, of course, is threatened by China, Russia, etc. But there is also a threat, domestic threat, for the rule of law. The principles that are engraved, you know, in the European treaties and conventions, more important conventions, that, sorry, I think there is a problem with the mic. No, it's okay? Okay. That those principles, you know, no. This one is better, maybe. Okay, thank you. Basically, those principles are also threatened from within. And you have a lot of disputes about not only the very nature of Europe, but about, you know, what is the principles, the values it stands for. But we have this confrontation within Europe. We have this confrontation between people, and in democracy that's quite normal, who disagree. But there are some groups that are also trying to impose their own view on others. And so the very consensus that existed before, and also the questions of basically liberal democracy, that was certainly, I mean, the ideal promoted by Alexis de Tocqueville, is also threatened very much in Europe, with also this question. I remember that Tocqueville once said that basically during Inquisition's time, there were some books that people dared to publish and to make circulated among the people. In the United States, as it depicted, you know, in the 1840s, it said basically people have no more the idea to publish such books. And that's all about the questions, rivalries within Europe. We have these questions of tolerance. We have these questions of respect. We have, of course, the questions of education, which is certainly in most of the European societies, but in the US, in Canada as well, one of the main challenges we have to face. And I think these kind of questions, that's the questions that we will have to address, and I will ask the panel to address. I will divide the panel, you know, in two parts. First of all, I will ask each panelist maybe to speak about 5 minutes about, you know, what is his, sorry, you know, her, his main statements about the current state of Europe, about the challenges it is facing. And then there will be a second round about, which is in my view very important, the solutions and also the way out that we could maybe try to elaborate. Thank you very much. So I will first of all give the floor to Bernard Cazeneuve. Bernard Cazeneuve is a former Prime Minister of France and also a lawyer right now. And you have, of course, his bio, you know, in your documents. Mr. Prime Minister, please.
Thank you so much. If you agree, I will speak in French, because I am here in my former constituency, very beautiful place where Tocqueville wrote some books, and especially a book concerning democracy in America, but he wrote it in French. So I am going to speak French. But I wanted before to explain why. Donc merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much for hosting us in this place, Jean-Guillaume and Stéphanie. It's with a great honor that I'm coming back to the Manche department and meet you again during these conversations to talk about topics that goes beyond this department and this territory, and enable us to touch upon geopolitical topics that are of utmost importance in a context where war is raging and values of democracy are questioned, not only because of conflicts existing in Europe, but also because of the world conflictuality. But also the abandonment of democracy value from people who thought they were at the head of the free world. So I will first give a few elements on how Europe was built as a project. You were right earlier, Mr. Commissioner, to insist on the fact that initially, when we built a European nation, there were the founding fathers, but it was the will that war, which had ravaged the world with events that had shown that war could lead to the worst barbarism on humans with the Holocaust. So the founding fathers of Europe wanted to prevent war from coming back, and that peace would be a promise happening on the European continent, and that peace would be articulated deeply, ontologically, and linked to democracy. Democracy, in the founding fathers' mind, meant adhering to the big principles of universalism, which is to devolve power with the vote, to respect big individual and collective freedoms, and thirdly, to meet this objective, the utmost respect of the principle of the state, of the rule of law, which means that no countries, and in their spirits, could have thought that there could have been a divorce between democracy and the principles of the rule of law. And Nicolas reminded in his introduction, there's no possibility to have peace or to have fundamental rights recognized or for universalism, no matter the territories, the borders, the continents, if there is not a powerful attachment, and that cannot be questioned, to the big principles of the rule of law. And this seems to me like the first challenge. It's there for a few reasons. So first of all, the war that started on the European continent, even though it concerns countries that are not in the Union, but that was made possible because one country, against all international law principles, the rule of law, has invaded his neighbor against the principle of people to dispose of themselves. So it's a big principle that is questioned of what we fought for. Second element, some countries are members of the European Union and who, therefore, before being members of the Union, took the commitment to respect what we called the EC, the acquis communautaire, something that we have all together and that we cannot go away from. And some people are moving away from these principles. So some say that without questioning the vote, think that they can go away from the principles of the rule of law to be more efficient. Some countries in Europe have accepted this acquis communautaire, but that thought that they could move away from it while not participating in this. So a third topic, which is that in the free world representation that goes beyond the borders of the EU. So in the representation of this free world that has led the world to never derogate for the attachment to the transatlantic relationship, even though that in France we've always thought that it went with a certain independency as well. Hence, General de Gaulle's position on the European construction, on the national independence. But nobody ever thought that defending the free world could be realized with being distant from the transatlantic relationship. And the Americans were always the leaders of this free world and the warrantor. And now we have an administration in the US saying two things. First of all, Europe must handle herself, and even though the principles of the law are questioned, and secondly, and there was this incredible scene and meeting in the White House. We have seen an American president humiliating the president of a nation invaded by a dictator, and saying that the dictator was the victim and the other way around. So we have seen the president of the free world live not caring for these big principles. So these values, these connections, and in Normandy, for history reasons, we know the sacrifice of Americans that have made for our peace and to get Europe out of totalitarianism. Hence, we feel a big pain, as with many Americans, what this position means for the world as a challenge. So if faced with all of these elements, Europe is not able to be courageous with determination as a defense continent of democratic values, meaning the uncontested connection between democracies and the principles of the rule of law, then I don't think the international order will last for very long. So, what are we? We are these values, and what we will be, it will be the capacity to defend these values, calling on huge determination to be at the level for history. Thank you very much, Bernard Cazeneuve, for these few words. I think you've put your finger on a major topic, which is that the rule of law, which is, I think, is the heritage of Europe, what defines Europe since its beginning. It's been founded on Kant principle in a perpetual peace. So when this principle is questioned, we face quite a void. So in the United States, the president has shown no real interest in the rule of law, and as well for the international law, with having a relationship with the war criminal Vladimir Putin, and all of his words on Panama, on Greenland, on Gaza. So it shows that we are facing a huge challenge.
Europe, Konstantin Semyansky, also to elaborate during 5 minutes about, the main challenges that Europe is facing. Mr. Minister.
My name is Konrad Szymański, but Konstantin is equally fine, so I will elaborate about it later, but I'm not ready to accept this at the first sight. I think it is pretty clear that we have exactly the same catalogue of values, both the most principal values, like the legal guarantees of democratic participation, a rule of law, democracy. Also, the other sort of values, like the social inclusion, the equality paradigm, because this is the catalogue of values which govern our statehood, and it is not coincidence, because this is our choice. This is exactly the world we want to defend, vis-à-vis the alternatives we see in the world landscape more and more profoundly. But in the same time, reading our historical experience and our constitutional traditions, we know very well that from country to country, we implement those values sometimes in a little bit different way. It doesn't mean that we can do whatever we want with this. I'm far from this point of view. It definitely doesn't mean such a relativism, and this remark I would dedicate my right-wing colleagues. But in the same time, it doesn't mean that we have only one model how we can execute this democratic model in our countries, even in Europe. I think France is a very good example where the principle of privacy and the principle of security, of basic state role vis-à-vis the citizens, could be balanced in a different way than in many other countries. I'm meaning the judgment of the Conseil d'État about the data detention. I'm definitely in favor of such a deliberations because, especially vis-à-vis the new phenomenon, and data detention is a quite new reality, we are moving ahead, we are stepping ahead in unknown territory, and we should be ready to accept and exchange our thinking, what we should do with this sort of correlation of values. Because the constitutional tradition, historical political experience is one thing, let's say a soft aspect of this. But the hard aspect of the value debate is the correlation, the coexistence, the interdependence of different fundamental values in a very concrete situation, like the privacy problem and the privacy debate we have here in Europe. It's even more controversial when we put this dialogue at the transatlantic level. We experienced it during the Munich Security Conference, where many Europeans were absolutely touched by the remarks by Vice President Vance. And Vice President Vance did anything new. He presented American way of thinking about the freedom of speech and expression. It's nothing new. America decided in their constitutional development to put freedom of expression as a fundamental, unconditional value in the framework of democratic regime. And it's nothing new. I think it shouldn't be nothing new for our American colleagues that we in Europe, we decided differently. Because of our historical experience of Holocaust, we accepted the fact that the freedom of expression could be very carefully, could be conditional in some specific cases. It is expressed by the European Convention of Human Rights. It is expressed in national legal regime in France, in Germany, to some degree also in Poland. Of course, it doesn't mean that we can open the door very widely to say that the freedom of expression is relative. It's absolutely fundamental. It is not relative. But we have slightly different tradition of thinking about the correlation, interaction of different fundamental freedoms in our democratic regime. I think it's good to exchange opinions also with American colleagues, but it's not very good and rather toxic to teach each other what we should think about it. And I think after this experience, I think we should be more careful about teaching each other what we should do, and it works on both directions, I would say. So this is it, the fundamental thing. I think I would prefer in a situation like this, in a moment like this, I would prefer to talk about what is the most positive experience of the last 3 years. And the most positive experience is enormous convergence of opinions, enormous consolidation of Europe around not only values, but also around the strategic vision, what we really want from the world, how we see the world, how we read the challenges ahead of us. And here we have enormous success, to be honest. Our reaction to war in 2022 was significantly better than our reaction to war, more or less the same war, in 2014. Our consolidation today, it is of course not finished. We are in the middle of the road. But also this conference illustrates very well that we put attention to the same things and that we know very well that we have to do it together. From Polish perspective, specifically, it is important to think about it as wide as possible. We are probably the last country which would add any negative factor to the unity of the West. We believe that the challenges we have ahead of us are big enough to consolidate the world, not only European Union, not only Europe, but the whole so-called Western world. There are not only Western countries in this political concept. It is not only the question of our historical experience, it is also the question of the scale of the problems we are facing right now. So, of course, it could happen that we will not be able to do it. But let the others decide that they should stay apart. We shouldn't add this factor in our own best interest. The very last thing I would like to say, and this is, again, a little bit negative remark, is the fact that apart from this very positive development we witnessed last 3 years, we still can't resolve the existential problem of Europe, which is enormous uncertainty about the future. This is something new. We used to live in a continent which were very self-esteemed, self-confident, that we can control our future with our sophisticated administrative tools, with our legal proficiency, with our dominant role in most progressive things in economic and social sphere. And now this world is changing. And of course, it's a new situation. It's a sort of shock for all of us. And we have experienced a multiple crisis in Europe, which illustrates very well that the situation is a little bit out of control. So we need a new solutions to take control back of our future, because otherwise our people will be under the shadow, a growing shadow of uncertainty, and this uncertainty erodes the social and political fundament of the European project today. I think it's existential. How to do it? It's of course easy to say at the conference level how to do it. Maybe we should elaborate about it later. But of course, I have some remarks to share. But maybe it's a moment to stop and to come back to this issue. I can promise you some remarks how to do it. I'm not sure if it's a very easy task, but we should concentrate on it, because I have a strong feeling that the uncertainty is a problem, and it's not accidental. And the fact that the European Union was driven by the output legitimacy, by the fact that people were happy with the output, were happy with the result, and they accepted the whole package for a very long time. It doesn't work anymore, and we have to do something with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Minister. I mean, your last point reminds me of what, you know, the French-Greek philosopher Cornelius Cartoriadis once said, which was basically our basement is founded on darkness. And I think probably could encapsulate exactly what you said. No, maintenant je me tourne vers Monsieur.
Now I will turn to Vincent Montagne. So to have a short introduction, you have 5 minutes. You can speak in French or in English, as you wish. Just as the Prime Minister, I will speak in French, and I want to have an introduction in English anyway. So thank you very much. Thank you for being here in this amazing place. I would like to remind you that in the 19th century, Bismarck said, diplomacy without weapons is like music without the instruments. And I think what's important, we need to keep on remembering that how he was influenced by Clausewitz, and when you look at René Girard's books To End Clausewitz, you understand the construct that led to the world wars. And this imitation game without verticality, without spirituality. So this aspect is crucial. And when the Prime Minister reminded us that he has a nonsensical discussion between the American president and the Ukrainian president, the picture of it is the disrespect of the international law and disrespect of people. And in that sense, 2 days ago we celebrated the 80th century of a publishing house in France called Le Seuil. It was founded in 1935. It's a left-wing publishing house heavily influenced by Catholicism of the 30s. So we were already observing the first signs that would lead to the Second World War. So it had to do to cope with collectivism and individualism. And Emmanuel Houllier, who unfortunately died in the 50s, and he created this concept of personalism. And I think that for Le Seuil publishing house, it was, and its editors, and it was extremely important. we also published Solzhenitsyn for the very first time in Europe. And he published the Gulag Archipelago. So 80 years. So just 2 days ago, we celebrated the 80th anniversary of, let's say, publisher, and it's important to reconstruct, to rebuild democracy, the right, the rule of law, and how we can use culture to reconstruct something, to rebuild the rule of law. And as the president of publishers and editors, I had a lot of appointments in Brussels to meet the EU commissioners, and we insisted on the cultural exception of France. In 2012, we established with creative industries. It represents approximately a turnover of 95 billion euros of revenues. So I think that when we have this new creative and cultural industries, we try to change drastically this. So, but we managed to have a law on copyrights, and we have 5 MPs who voted, a majority of 5. So this idea of the can use this very important soft power, because it is not a soft power but a hard power. So this responsibility we have on the European level, we have to rebuild a culture, a European culture, a powerful European culture. Thank you very much, but your words also highlighted the importance of culture, but in its European culture we are threatened. It cannot be like a fortress. You cannot live as an island, but Europe has several messages to convey, but also on the cultural point of view. So while we're resisting the big tech from America and from China, we can be a true inspiration. It's including for countries in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America. They can share and they can acknowledge that we share the same values, the same principles. We defend, and now I'll move on and now move to Dominique Moisy. If you can have 5 minutes. You can do your presentation in French or in English, as you wish. Thank you very much, Nicolas. Can you hear me well? Yes. All right. Okay. So first and foremost, can you hear me well? All right. Yes, Nicolas and everyone, can you hear me? Okay. All right. First of all, I'm truly sorry for not being able to be with you today. And I'd like to apologize to Jean-Guillaume and Stephanie. It's a magical place. And one of the many reasons I wanted to move to the Marche department, and I decided to do so 43 years ago, but unfortunately I could not be with you today. And I would like to thank the technologies for being able to kind of still be with you. So very briefly, a few points. The first point is the transformation of the role played by the US in the world in the last 80 years, between 1945 until today, 2025. The United States have been the principle of a world order, even though they didn't always behave rigorously and efficiently, but globally speaking, US represented a world order, and we may ask ourselves if they didn't become an agent of chaos, an agent of instability. And we may wonder whether the US had not become a revisionist state like Russia is and like China is too. when we listen to Donald Trump, and he says that I have the right to get Greenland and I want to have Canada, and the Panama Canal is part of, should belong to us, and he kind of goes back to what we were hearing at the end of the 19th century. And the second essential point is that in the current geopolitics, we tend to get back to the Cold War, and we hear the same thing we heard during the Cold War until 1991. Well, the situation has changed drastically because it's no longer Europe in its interaction with the US. It's the relationship of the West with the rest of the world. We no longer have this single one-size-fits-all model. The world has evolved and changed, even against us. Robert Badinter, during a conversation we've had together just before we died, and he told me, our values are no longer consensual, but it's not a reason not to believe there are universal values. But how can we reconcile universal values with a world where they're no longer consensual? And I think we have to be humble when we talk to other entities, but we also have ambitions for ourselves. And for way too long, we Europeans, we were arrogant when we spoke to all the rest of the world, and we were complacent when we talked to ourselves. And the essential question is the next one. In less than 100 days, Donald Trump should have forced us to act as adolescents and become true adults, and force us to understand that we could no longer rely on the US to guarantee our security and our defense. The NATO meeting, which took place in Den Haag last week, was kind of an ambiguous results. We voted boldly to increase our defense budgets. So everything will happen in 2035 when we start seeing the results of this decision, but the reflexes of the past appeared loudly when we listened to the ministry, the Secretary General of NATO flattering Donald Trump in a nonsensical way. We are embarrassed as Europeans. And we think it's no longer a tactic to negotiate with the US. There we see the old traditional reflexes coming back from the past. And we don't know how to act and how to behave without the US. And we understand that we are alone. But we also foster a rational way of living, a rational model when you talk to Canadians, to South Koreans, when you talk to the Japanese. We talk about a Europe of the past, a model of the past, when we see that Europe is transactional, whimsical, sometimes nonsensical, and unfortunately they are unreliable and they cannot be trusted. The problem is not the instability, and the unpredictability of Trump. We get the feeling that we cannot trust them anymore. They are unreliable. And I will conclude with just one sentence. The problem is that if we want to be a model, an aspiration for the world, because we believe in our own values, because we believe that our values are universal, then we have to become autonomous actors, truly independent stakeholders. Is that possible? Do we have the will to do so? But I don't know. And sometimes I'm surprised and shocked to see that in such pivotal moments, the debates we have in our societies are not at the level of our ambitions and the stakes we're facing. That's all, Nicholas. It's difficult to talk to a camera, but I wanted to bring my contribution. Thank you very much, Dominique, for these very strong words. And from a personal point of view, I fully agree with you. I look at law. Do we still have like 20 minutes? More or less.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much.
So we have the time to have a second round of remarks. Et je vais commencer par Bernard Cazeneuve. Si voilà.
And I will talk to Bernard Cazeneuve. So maybe let's go back to some potential solutions, some practical solutions you may share with us. Okay, first of all, I would say a few words to say I fully agree with Dominique's Moise's analysis on the shape of the relationship between the US and Europe and the legitimate questions we have and on the reliability of the US. And let me go back to what the minister said during his speech and how we can interpret differently the most essential questions on democracy and most notably freedom of speech. And I wanted to say a few words about this because I think it's a pillar in how we can structure our Europe, and it could be important debate to have with the US on a traditional topic, and we may lead to different interpretations whether you're American or European. As a Ministry of Home Affairs, I had to confront the GAFAM, and I spent a whole week in the Silicon Valley after the terrorist attacks in 2015, the attacks on the kosher bakery in Paris and the Charlie Hebdo attacks. And I have to go to the US because during the hours following these attacks, we have a lot of Islamophobic attacks and a lot of posts hostile to the institutions, and we have all these attacks and these hateful comments were multiplied by 30. So when we wanted to remove these hateful posts, well, the Americans refused to remove these hateful posts because of the freedom of speech. And I always considered, and we consider when we have some anti-Semitic comment, we call for hatred, and we had hateful posts and comments on social media. This is not freedom of speech, it's a crime. And since we were hit heavily because of this new freedom of speech, we consider that we have to fight this fight. So I traveled to the US. I was called by the Ministry of Justice and Ministry of the US. Say, could you stop over in Washington before you go to the Silicon Valley? And I met my American counterparts, and they told me, you are so presumptuous, especially the French. You want the Americans, and you want the major American companies to remove these hateful comments, well, some people tried just last week. Do you think you can achieve anything at all? I didn't expect much when I arrived in the Silicon Valley. I just wanted to prove my point. You know, I didn't expect much, so I arrived in the Silicon Valley and arrived in San Francisco. And there was a big, big poster, 20 meters by 5 meters, with my picture, my photo. Welcome to the ministry, to the French Ministry of Justice. I think it was we were off to a bad start because we was proof that I wouldn't achieve anything at all. So we started the discussions, and we started to the discussions with N-25 very low-level officials and low-level representatives of my these companies, and then I printed these hateful speeches and comments and videos of people being decapitated and anti-Semitic posts, and I felt some kind of embarrassment. So at one point during the discussion, I said, "You may not want to do anything at all, but my German counterpart, Mr. de Maizière, and my British counterpart, Theresa May, my counterparts and I will try to do what we can so we can have a European directive. So we'll hit you hard if you don't remove these hateful posts. If you don't want to do it, well, and we started the GDPR, actually it was extraterritorial European directive. So he looked at me in a very awkward way, and the day after I received a phone call, and I had the opportunity to meet all the internet companies, and I spent them all day, and have many discussions with this in Paris. So it was in February 2015, and in April 2015 we signed an agreement with these companies, and they committed to removing these hateful speeches and hateful sites. And so we may have different point of view and different approaches. But what I remember from this episode is that even though we disagree and we have different interpretations, we need to defend our own interpretation, because if we don't do it, no one will do it for us. So the second conclusion I draw from this episode is that there are very powerful American companies, and I hope you didn't miss that most of the CEOs of these companies have become the best friends of Trump, and they also became self-claimed ambassadors of the new president. They didn't come to the EU to talk about the nuances and differences with interpretation, but they joined the far-right movements, and they said, just like Elon Musk did, the freedom of speech, you see, the way you see it in Europe, belongs to the past. It's not what we see, what we consider to be freedom of speech. It's not just a nuance of interpretation. While defining the freedom of speech, we have two different and incompatible interpretations, and it's a confrontation of points of view, and we need to defend our point of view if we don't want that the new digital world, the digitalization of the world, may lead to we have a digital world dominated by hatred and hateful speeches, and it may actually jeopardize the way we can live together. It's not just a small nuance. It is something essential, and we need to work on this. And what about the solutions? And I'll just in a few words. If we want to defend our model, we have to be powerful, but we are weak now. And I think Dominic talked about the NATO announcement on budgets, but I look at my own country, and God knows I love my country, and I served the country with my sincerity. And we have a meeting with all the heads of staff of the countries, and we announced sharp increase in our budgets, and I'm in favor of this, but we have 3,200 billion euros of debt in France, so we need to have the good conditions so we can have the necessary budget, and they must be in line with our ambitions when we have a nuclear power. So because otherwise what we want to do, our ambitions is just like pure rhetorics. So if we want to be able to fund some disruptive budgets, and I say that to the European commissioners, because we want to be able to defend our sovereign interests, we must be able to share part our debts, because Mario Draghi mentioned the amount of 800 billion euros of debt, so we need to have the necessary means, the necessary resources, and that implies that we need to share our debts, share the burden of the debts. But we have frugal countries, and some very conservative countries will not accept to share a debt if the more generous states haven't tried to reduce their own debt. So we have to be lucid, we have to be clear-sighted. If we cannot reduce our own debts, we cannot ask other countries to share more debt. And if our discourse is not in line with the reality, it's not going to work. So we need to make efforts, we need to share the debt, we need to fund more disruptive ambitions, and at the end of the day we need to have 35 from the US instead of buying German planes or private jets. What's going to happen if we don't give priority to the European industries? If we cannot buy European equipment because we be fully independent, because if we buy American jets, we don't have the full control, because if the Americans don't want you to use your jets, you want to use them, trust me. So we give the priority to European industries, European manufacturers, otherwise it wouldn't make sense. And finally, if we to defend our own interests, we need to make sure that the defense industry in Europe can produce the jets and the equipment we need. And as I say that in terrible, we are far from it. So this is everything we have to do. It's great to have speeches on the European sovereignty and European defense. It's great, but they're still very abstract, and we need to take decisions in a very short term, and we have bold decisions. And we need to make sure that we have decision makers, heads of state, who can say to the populations what's currently happening and what the deadlines are and the milestones in the near future. Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur le Premier ministre. Alors,
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. We only have 10 minutes left, so maybe two elements that you've said. Are you all okay? I'm afraid we won't be able to have time for questions for the audience. But there are two central points in what you mentioned here. So first of all, there's a real question here on truth. So do we accept to play the game of revisionist nations such as Putin's Russia, who wants to destroy the truth, scientific truth, for example, with the debate that we have in with America on negationism for the Holocaust? So this is right in the center, the truth. And you have also shown that the power in Europe exists. We have a capacity, military speaking, but we must face the fact that there is a war here. So now I give the floor to the Minister for European Affairs of Poland.
On freedom of speech is not a nuance, absolutely, because it represents something much more or much less hypothetical, much less academic, because it represents the problem of the role of big tech in our democratic culture. And it's totally valid that we can make different choices in both sides of the Atlantic, and we still are a liberal democracies with a different models, profiles. We shouldn't condemn each other. But here, in a technological sphere, we live in one entity. And here, that's why the problem is so sensitive, because we live in a sort of digital America, having the machines on our pockets. And there are many positive things because of this. I would prefer digital America than digital China, of course. But in this specific case, the freedom of speech, the way we want to communicate in the public sphere, we have a problem. And the problem is very old, but now appeared to be very, very functional or very important, very fundamental. If we really want to restore the trust to the European project, we have to address the uncertainty, which is eroding the fundamentals of our situation here. The trust is lower and lower, and the hostility is growing. And the condemnation, the Savonarolian sermons about the values don't work. But you can't condemn 40% of your society being disinformed, being not exactly on a valid position in terms of liberal values. If you are talking about 5%, probably it's true. With 40%, it is not a right way to do. The output, again, should be a little bit more attractive. And the output legitimacy of the European project works well before, when the weather was good. We didn't pay too much attention to the market trilogues, to the composition of the European Parliament, to the role of lobbying in Brussels. We don't care because the output was very positive. We were happy. And now we are not fully happy with the output because of the multiple crises, the debt, climate, migration, COVID, a Russian war in the end. So there are good grounds to be a little bit uncertain about our future, and we have to do our best to offer Europeans something better. And to do it, I think, as we are in the panel about values more than the functional politics, or policies even, I would like, having in mind the American panel yesterday, I would like to touch one more political thing, I think pretty important to all of us. I think you remember the great manifesto presented by The Economist in 2018. That was 175th anniversary of the Economist, about reinventing of the liberal order. I think it was unnoticed by the political class. We are in a far worse situation today, and it's a pity. I think it should be read very carefully, because there were plenty of advice from the very credible, much more credible than me, source of inspiration. If we really want to make the liberal order or democratic war order survive, we should be careful about this thing, and we should be open to reinventing this world, to reconcile, for example, the open society concept with proper and effective control of migration. There is no contradiction in essence. That could be a contradiction, but there is no fundamental contradiction. We have to think again about the cost distribution of climate and energy transformation. Not to negate, not to refuse the concept, but to make it a little bit more certain for the people, especially at the social level. We all have, Gilles Jean, farmers in Netherlands, many people concerned about the cost of housing and cost of transport, cost of heating in all our countries. We have to do something with this. I appreciate the fact that the European Commission now is thinking again about the revision of some most crisis aspect of the situation, but we have to do it very, very seriously. We have to do something in defense, of course. The response to war in Ukraine will define our project. After Mark Lilla, to find a person with a little bit better liberal credentials than my own. After Mark Lilla, I would repeat that liberal circles should do something with the identity politics of the left. Because this is the one of the triggers which destroys the democratic liberal concept, Tocquevillian concept, by the way, today. Of course, I know that the conservatives are equally impressed by the nativist populist tendencies, and we have a problem as well. But I think the dialogue, open constructive dialogue between the liberal and conservative side in Europe is a necessary precondition to revive this world again and to offer better answers for the present generation. The very last thing, Timothy Garton-Ash, all the publications I mentioned are from 2016, 18, 20. It's a really pity that we have to come back to this inspiration in 2025. Timothy Gartenage once said that the essence of the liberal thinking is a self-criticism, which is, of course, right. The orthodoxy isn't the liberal answer for the problems we face. And he said equally, I even wanted to check because I didn't believe that the Polish translation is correct, but he used a word that we have a defected balance between the individual and the society. And rightly so. I think we have to find the right balance because otherwise the uncontrolled pendulum will go, I don't know where, but it doesn't look very, very secure. Uncontrolled pendulum isn't the right way to create a new stagecraft for today. We have to control the pendulum.
Thank you, Terence. Thank you very much, Minister. Yes, it reminds me of the debate that we had in the 90s about the so-called communitarian liberalism debate. And in fact, I mean, it's very important. So, je parle maintenant pour aussi 3 minutes, et puis 3 minutes pour finir, vraiment 2 minutes. Bon, mais faites ton signe à Dominique Moisy, pardon, Vincent Montagne.
Non, je vais être bref.
I'll be brief. You're talking about the look for truth. We now have a global website called Aletheia, meaning truth in Greek, that have reached 35 million of young people around spirituality. And what strikes me is the emergence of many books on self-accomplishment, well-being, and the look for service to help others. Dominique was saying earlier that we need to be modest to address things and to have an ambition to reach universalism. A week ago, I was at a meeting with an Amazon director and a leader. You might know that Amazon has limited the amount of books that an author can publish, and it's 3 books per day. Per day. So it's a very simple question. It's AI writing the books, of course. With 100 to 500 comments made by the AI on how excellent the books are. So in this meeting, he told me this thing. Prove me that the books that are written by AI are less good than yours. It's hard to answer to this. And I told him, prove me that the comments that are made are real and fair. And there was a moment of silence. I told him, of course, on an economic point of view, I have nothing to say, but ethically, are you in your own right? And he told me, okay, we're going to put up a team together to work on comments. So this all brings us back to something fundamental. What is truth? And what do we want? Which truth do we want to have? Dominique, you have the word of conclusion. So 2 things. In Timothy Gartenage's spirit, there was self-criticism. The week that's just gone through was very good for Donald Trump. It was not good for Europe. That has displayed its unpowerfulness and its divisions. We are kind of back to the times when Europe was compared to the Greek heart in antique tragedy, the global stakeholder who comments on the events rather than acting on them. We commented in a divided manner regarding the Middle East events. For example, there was the German Merck's position, who congratulated Israel, and I quote, to do the dirty job for the Western world. There was then the French reaction that was much more moderated and neutral. How can we give to the world the image of a global actor that is moderated, rational, if we are divided to that point between ourselves on fundamental questions. So we need more Europe, yes, but this is not going to be achieved through the display of our divisions when Europe is, history is at a turn. Thank you very much, Dominic.
To the audience, sorry, we hadn't time for Q&A, but next time certainly, and we'll continue the discussions. Thank you very much.